Welcome back to Utah Stories. So today on the program, we're talking all about affordable housing. Why not have more tiny homes? Why not make single family homes and starter homes more affordable by allowing different zoning types and housing types? I want to show a clip right now. This is the tiny home village, the first ever in Utah. This is what it looks like as of yesterday, which was June 26th. Stakes in the ground, a lot of dirt. You can start to see the beginnings of the sewer lines. And this tiny home village was proposed in 2020, and we're here June 2024.
That's a great question. I wasn't around, for part of that time, but part of the concern with this is what we talked about a little bit earlier that I have concern with, and that's the concentration of one socioeconomic group in just this area. So who do you associate with? Who are your friends? Who are your, that's a concern to me that we go this, completely in this thing of saying, hey, let's just find a piece of ground and we'll just put all the people that make under 20% AMI, under 30% AMI in that space. I think that's really unhealthy for a community, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to provide housing,
and it's like the people who they've chosen most of the people who are going to be living there. They're disabled veterans. Mm-hmm. They're seniors priced out of the market. They're people who suffer from mental disabilities, and you look at the other model of permanent supportive housing. And those places get overrun by drug abuse, and they just fall being dilapidated. But what I'm really impressed with about the tiny home village is it's not actually supported by government grants. Mm-hmm. It's not like taxpayers are paying for this. I want to show another clip of the opening of the brand new Other Side donut shop.
One of our things here at the donut shop, as you're going to see, is about dreams. And dreams can be whimsical and magical. As you go through the shop, you'll be able to see the wonder and the fun. We think Willy Wonka would have been proud of us. Dreams. 3, 2, 1.
Enterprise and this untapped workforce of people who decided, I'm going to get off drugs. I'm going to turn my life around. I'm going to sign up for the program. Why can't we embrace more? I mean, Governor Cox tried to get $150 million for affordable housing. I know you guys are talking about it, but what are the number one or the top three housing solutions that we can or top pieces of legislation we can introduce that will solve this using the free enterprise system?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Let me just give a shout out to the Other Side Academy and what a fantastic effort by Joseph Granny and those associated with that. Every time I see, if you need to move, call the Other Side movers. Mm-hmm. I see their trucks every once in a while. It just makes me smile, because these are ex-convicts who are making a commitment to changing their lives, and they're doing it. Mm-hmm. And they get the right amount of support. And I think that's part of what we've been talking about is, we have to provide those opportunities to create community. And the tiny home village is a necessary thing. I mean, we just have to do that. We're going to have to do more of those, but I don't want to see that as the only solution, that we create islands. We have to do a better job of doing integrated housing solutions where we're dealing with both, like you said, in England, you've got a big home next to a bunch of lower income wage workers. That's healthy. That's healthy for our communities. It's healthy for our economy. As we look forward to the 2025 legislative session, we have several priorities. The number one priority that we're focusing on is what are we doing with our public lands? And Utah is over 70% of Utah is public land.
Can you show the map of Utah, Allegra? Every time I look at this state map, I'm just amazed by how small the sliver of our 2.5 million people along the Wasatch Front is compared to the size of the state. I mean, if you zoom out, the size of our state is just so massive, and we just live in this teeny little sliver.
We live in a bobsled track between the mountains and the Great Salt Lake. I mean, we just have this very limited, and it's been fine for a long time. We've had land to grow, and now we don't. We're done. You know, we really don't have large parcels of land left in that zone to grow to. And so you see what's happening. Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs are exploding. Southern Utah County, Box Elder County. I mean, we're growing outward from that. Part of what I think we need to do is to encourage appropriate growth in our rural areas. We have beautiful places to live, and it's interesting. The housing crisis is actually worse in rural Utah than it is in our populated areas.
I discovered that.
There's less opportunity there. We have school superintendents that are renting basement houses, or renting basements in somebody else's house because they can't afford a home in rural Utah. Teachers, we have school districts that own housing for their teachers because they can't afford to get housing in some of our resort areas. We think Moab and those areas.
We go to Moab a lot, but we went actually to Gunnison, Utah, where there's a prison, and they have a shortage of prison workers because there's no affordable housing. And I went with a developer who bought an existing pre-built development area, a place where you had RVs and double wide trailers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he bought it because he thought he could expand it because there was no affordable housing. And then he found that even though they had plenty of water coming in, the city council denied it because they said there's not enough water.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to have 10 more housing units for prefab homes, which would have been, he sold the ones that were already built that he was able to build for about $100,000.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you build a home in a factory, it's going to be way cheaper than a home built using current construction costs, which are around, I believe, around $200 a square foot.
Yeah.
So why not just tell these cities and towns, I understand you mentioned the hyper-local problem,
Mm-hmm.
but why not make it abundantly clear to them, you're literally removing the socioeconomic ladder for everyone younger than that doesn't have a home mortgage already by not allowing prefab homes or starter homes. Do they just not get it, or what? I just don't see why they can't just do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting psychological study because, again, it's the same thing we talked about. You know, whose kids need housing, and they all raise their hands. Who wants that housing to be right here? Oh, not here. Go solve it somewhere else. And that's part of the message that we're trying to get out. The legislature did appropriate $1 million last year for a messaging campaign because we do have to change the narrative around density. All density is not bad. Go to Daybreak. I mean, that's a wonderfully dense community. It's very well designed. We can do more like that. When people think of density, they think, a very negative density issue, or examples that they've seen where it's, run down and kind of beaten down. And we don't have to do density like that. That's a choice we make. And that really happens at the local level when they do the zoning, when they do the planning. And so part of what we're doing is providing them with more support, more expertise that they can draw on, particularly in our rural communities through their associations of government to do more master planning so that they don't have the fear that when they do these more dense communities or they do manufactured housing that they're going to get quote unquote overrun with low income housing. And that it just does not have to be the case.
Yeah, can you show my screen, Allegra?
Mm-hmm.
So this is what you're talking about. Utah Workforce Housing Advocacy. This was the $1 million campaign to try to get more people to understand that density is not a bad thing. And So was this did you go out and give talks, or how did you guys roll this out and try to make it work?
Well, it's funny. This actually started after I left the legislature and kind of decided I wasn't going to run again. A couple of friends and I were talking, and we said we need to do something about this. And so we created this structure and decided we were going to do this. And then I got asked to be the housing policy guy for the governor. And this was already in place. So we'd already started to build this 501c3. So it's a 501c3. You can see my face on there. But what we tried to do is, this is a broad coalition of the willing, and it includes Republicans, Democrats, every socioeconomic strata. I mean, we got developers in there. We've got community representatives, the League of Cities and Towns. We have a policy committee made up of like the Gardner Policy Institute, the Utah Foundation.
Ari with Envision Utah.
Envision Utah. I mean, we're bringing together everybody into under one umbrella, so we can come up with one message that goes out through all of these different organizations' channels that says, let's do the right thing, basically. And that right thing is, we need to create more housing for our kids and grandkids. And if we don't, 40 or 50 years from now, we're not going to like the shape of our state or our country. Mm-hmm. It will not be pretty, because that is the number one savings vehicle for the middle class of America.
Yeah, and so what did you say you're doing to try to capture more of the land that's just unoccupied in Utah?
Yeah. So the number one policy proposal that I'm working on for next session is around our public lands. And it's not just the BLM land, which we know that the federal government owns a significant chunk of Utah. The state land trust owns a significant chunk of the rest of Utah. But when you drive around, and I think you referenced this earlier, we have lots of lots that are undeveloped, that are sitting there, and a big chunk of those are owned by public entities. Our school districts, our cities, our counties, our mosquito abatement districts, our Department of Agriculture, our Department of Transportation, UTA. I mean, we have all of these public entities that have either inherited or purchased or acquired land over the years.
And it's where a lot of homeless people camp.
It's where a lot of homeless people camp, and it's non-productive land. It's publicly owned. It's your land. It's my land. It's everybody's land. But it's not producing any tax revenue. It's not producing any benefit to the people of Utah. And so the policy objective there is, can we create opportunity with those public lands for the public benefit? And part of that solution, I think, we're looking at doing a land trust model in those public lands, where we can put the land in at a reduced value or at no value, and then have development go on those properties. So instead of having a $350,000 home, now you're looking at a 1,000 square foot home that maybe is $200,000, because you've taken that land cost component out of it. Because again, this is a public asset for the benefit of the public. That's one of the initiatives, and the front end of that we're doing right now, which is cataloging what we have. And it's really difficult, to get one database of all of the public land in Utah. It exists in a lot of different places, so we're bringing that all together. We want to publish that, make that available to everybody, so everyone can see the scope of the opportunity. I won't call it a problem, I'll call it an opportunity. And then we can use that public land. For instance, you think Salt Lake School District has closed a number of schools. Granite School District, we have Orem and Ogden, and Salt Lake City owns a number of parcels, a significant number of parcels. The county owns land. All of these different public entities, and most of them aren't designed to deal with disposition of land. That's just not what they do. And so they tend to just hang on to it, because then, we have to hire somebody to go out and figure out what to do with it, and we have to go through this process. Mm-hmm. And I think we can create a structure for them that will help them to kind of figure it out or pass. And if they pass, then we can take that and make that available for public use and lower cost housing.
Yeah, and I believe that's definitely a big part of the solution. I want to play one more clip from my computer, This is the Ramada. It's been vacant now for going 3 years. And this was land set aside for homeless housing, only affordable housing. There's an empty lot right next to it. Given to a developer, and he was given grants, 2 different grants totaling $6 million. We tried to get to the bottom of the story because I just couldn't believe it, because here you got a place you could just go in there, get some good framers, put in some new drywall, put in little kitchenettes, and you've got affordable housing. But that project, whether the developer completely dropped the ball or the city didn't give us permits, we weren't able to completely answer that question. I think the city didn't give them the permits, because then the Miller family came in, swooped in, and bought the land. And there was no land swap deal. That land set aside for affordable housing was never been swapped for other land somewhere else. It was just big developer came in and bought it. I mean, how do you stop things like that from happening? It just seems like if you're trying to build affordable housing, that kind of story, it would just make you pull out your hair.
Well, and I think that's exactly the reason why we need to create a structure that doesn't exist right now. And I don't know what that looks like, but that's what I was just talking about, because we have so many entities with land here and land there. And each one has their own set of rules. Each one has their own set of directives that, that some are very public and very transparent. SITLA actually does a fantastic job of publishing what they have, and I don't always agree with the results, but at least they're very transparent. They're very upfront about what they're doing. They're actually we're working with them on creating additional opportunities for affordable housing on the SITLA properties going forward.
And those are scattered everywhere.
All over the state, primarily southern Utah, but across the state.
Little rectangles all over Utah.
All over the place.
And so I guess the challenges there are building roads, getting the infrastructure, water. Is there a plan to develop more of rural areas where there's empty land, and to, I don't know, make it affordable? Because if you just were to put it on the market, it seems to me like Bill Gates is now the #1 farmland owner in the United States, followed by the Mormon Church. People just love buying empty land because it's a great asset. How do you prevent the elites from not just coming in and buying it all?
We're working with SITLA on that, and they actually have a really unique program that they're developing that will allow them to sell the land at market rates and meet their fiduciary obligation to the school children of Utah. That's their target, is let's provide for the school kids of Utah. That's what they're doing, and we have the trust that that then puts money into the school systems. But in addition to that, create opportunities on top of that for affordable housing, where the land goes in at no value, like I was just talking about, and then you can do developer requirement at cost. So they have to build it at cost and not create a profit opportunity there for them. So they have to do at cost housing development.
But why would a developer sign up for that?
Because they get the rest of it. They only get that if they get the rest. Yeah, okay, they get the rest, and then they're with that blessing, they get this obligation, or with that deal, they pick up an obligation, and it's worth it to them, frankly, because it doesn't.
Do you have any idea why that Ramada deal failed? Because the guy got the land for free.
I don't. That's kind of, again, I'm sort of the 50% up. Wayne Niederhauser, who's the homeless housing coordinator, and I sort of intersect in that 20 to 50% AMI range. We overlap because obviously if people drop out of that, they fall into homelessness, and so we want to make sure we're capturing that. But that Ramada deal was in the kind of the homeless side of things, and the very, very low income side, which is typically outside of my scope. But it's something that structurally I think we can address and do a better job, so that we're not doing these kind of one-off deals, but that we can create a structure that the public can have confidence in, that we're not simply enriching certain individuals, but we're actually using these public assets for the public good. And some states have done this to some effect, but I haven't seen a great model for that. We do have some land trusts in Utah that are really doing great things. The Moab Area Land Trust, Community Land Trust, is doing really great work. Mountain Lands Community Land Trust.
Except you still don't have affordable housing in Moab.
Oh yeah,
and that
I mean,
Cane Creek development was supposed to be affordable, and like the same thing, developer came in and developed it, and it's just not affordable. It's
but the Moab Community Land Trust, they got a gift of 40 acres, and on that 40 acres, they've now built. I'm trying to think of the number. I can't remember the number. Caitlin would have to tell you, but there's 50-ish homes, single family homes. They're all affordable. They're developing townhomes that are affordable, and then some apartments that are affordable on that 40-acre parcel right now.
Oh, okay.
Really
Is
positive
that
work.
Part of the Community Land Trust and the sweat equity programs. Those are similar programs.
Yeah, in fact, the Community Land Trust is putting land up, and then the sweat equity program is actually doing the home building.
Yeah,
so it's a really great partnership.
Yeah,
really great partnership, and we just have to do more of that. I mean, we just need more of that.
Yeah. I follow the tiny home movement on YouTube. So this guy's a YouTuber who YouTube's about the tiny home movement in Australia. Here's what he had to say about the dark side of tiny homes. Okay.
Heartbreaking rates of homelessness. It is my heartfelt belief that no government or council has the moral right to kick people out of safe, simple shelter, such as tiny homes, while thousands of their citizens sleep rough on the streets or in their cars. And yet sometimes, that is exactly what they do. There is hope on the horizon though. Thanks to the amazing work of tiny house activist groups around the globe, such as the American Tiny House Association, the Australian Tiny House Association, the New Zealand Tiny House Association, and so on. Thanks to the exceptional work of such tirelessly working activist organizations, many places around the world now have legalized tiny houses, and more places are added to this list every single year. But the wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly. As the cost of living increases and the rates of housing insecurity continue to rise, the laws are changing too slowly to keep up with the demand for tiny homes. Our lawmakers are failing in their duty of care to their citizens. Most of our governments have created policy and tax structures which encourage wealthy people to accumulate more and more property, driving up real estate costs and forcing now even middle-class people to be renters for life. Generally speaking, very little more than token gestures are done by governments towards actually helping people into their own homes. When it comes to policy and the tiny house movement though, I want to make it clear that the tiny house movement is not asking for handouts. Right now, we are simply asking the government to get out of our way while we try to create solutions for ourselves.
The reason I like the tiny home movement is because they're not asking for like a road to be built. Mm-hmm. They're not asking for water lines. It's kind of like an off-grid structure, pre-built, like it's a pre-built home that's on a trailer that you can park almost anywhere. You just got to have your own water and a solar panel. So it doesn't require those infrastructure costs. But still, if you wanted to park a tiny home, say outside of Moab on BLM land, you would immediately just get flagged and ticketed. So is there anything going on right now in legislation to help the tiny home movement flourish or succeed?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's maybe two branches to this tree. One is, and we talked about this a little bit, I think, at the break, is ADUs and external ADUs. Right now, there's a state law that allows for internal ADUs. I think we really need to take a very serious look at essentially tiny homes in the backyard. Mm-hmm. So an internal ADU is an accessory dwelling unit that exists within the structure of the home.
Yeah, which is really hard to pass.
Which is difficult to get.
You gotta hire an architect, probably pay him $10,000 before you even know.
It's really expensive. Yeah. It's expensive and it's challenging, and you got to have the extra space in your home. And if you build them on the front end, it's actually a great way to do it because you can create an apartment revenue stream, with your home, and it helps you afford, it helps with affordability. But we have, I look at our legacy cities. We have Salt Lake City. You have very large, long lots, right? And a lot of them have small homes on them. Ogden, all of our kind of pioneer era stuff was built with small homes on very long, deep lots. And it used to be everybody had a orchard and a garden, and those days are pretty well gone. And so we have this land available in our existing communities with existing infrastructure, where if we can go and drop essentially a tiny home in the backyard with adequate access, you can tie into the utilities, you're right there, you create a revenue structure for the owner. So again, you're increasing affordability, but you're also providing a place to live.
So much easier than an ADU to get past to build too.
Yeah, you have it shipped in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's built in a factory somewhere else. And Utah did pass, first time in I think 25 years, a state passed a streamlining factory-built home measures. The first one in 25 years, we just passed this last year to allow for inspections in the factory so that the municipalities don't have to do anything other than the attachments to the structure. So when they're delivered, they're inspected, approved, and you just drop them down. So that structure exists.
So you could do that now in Utah? You could put a tiny home in your backyard and rent it out?
Where it's legal. And it's not legal in a lot of places, and that's what we need to really take a hard look at.
So cities and towns have not legalized.
Cities and towns, again.
You guys on the state level have said, okay, is that what
We're working on that, and I think that's the concern with that from the city's side, and I get it. I mean, they have a stewardship and a responsibility to their citizens, right? We don't want to overwhelm our sewer structure. We don't want to create too much demand on our water. Do we have enough? And I think what has been found in other places, Portland is a really good example where they've been doing this for a number of years, and they created zoning that allowed for this to happen, and it hasn't broken the system. And so there's some studies that we can point to and say, look, this is an effective way to essentially create opportunity within our existing communities for people to come in and have a tiny home. Now the difference is it's on, you'd have to rent it from somebody else. It's not an ownership opportunity typically, which, that's the other branch is there an opportunity for people to own their own structure and come in?
I would think if you got it on a trailer, you could maybe, bring your own tiny home and just pay rent on the land.
I don't know why you couldn't.
Yeah. It just seems like a no-brainer because I got a little story to tell. My aunt who remembered all the stories my great-grandparents told. My great-grandparents arrived from Armenia in about 1910. They bought a little farm in Murray, even though they had almost nothing. They were paying a mortgage on that farm, but the farm was big enough to build some shacks on it. And those little tiny shacks they built, they rented out. And even though they had nothing, and they lost all their land in Armenia, they lost their homes because of the Armenian
genocide, yeah.
They were able to just rent those out, and that was my great-grandmother's retirement. Because she just, obviously, there was no Social Security back then. It just seems like such a easy, great way to solve this problem if people could just plop a tiny home or a prefab home in their backyard, rent it even to their kids. Instead of living in the basement, they could move there and maybe own the structure and sell the structure once it's paid off.
No, I totally agree. And if you think even from a generational standpoint, if you're living in the big house and you're renting out the little house and you get to the point in your life where I don't need the big house anymore, I just want the little house. You could have a retired couple, they could move into their small home, rent or sell their big house and have a life estate or something on their tiny home, in the backyard, their ADU in the backyard. And that structure has worked elsewhere. And so that's something we're going to take a really good look at and try to, again, alleviate the legitimate concerns. there are legitimate concerns around all of these things, right? But then there are some concerns that are more emotional than they are factual. And so we have to kind of get through the emotional stuff and push that to the side, and then let's deal with the real factual issues. Do we have sewer capacity? Do we have water capacity? Okay, then if we do, those are things that can be put on a piece of paper, and there are really smart people that can figure out what we can handle, and then let's build to that.
Yeah.
Build to that.
Find out what's
capacity. So that's another area of focus that we're looking at very closely, because I think that is a great solution for our legacy cities, for where we live and work.
Yeah. I don't know if you have time. I wanted to address a few questions we got.
I'm all ears.
Great.
Got me for as long as you want me.
We
Longer,
had an
probably.
Instagram post asking folks for questions.
Okay.
And then also we got two different ladies in the studio who work Utah Stories who also have housing questions. Why don't we start with your question, Allegra? This is like a
Sure.
typical Gen Zer problem.
Oh no. Does it?
What would you say to Gen Zers who think they can't afford a house in their lifetime?
I would say that their concerns are valid. When I talk to young people, and this is, I think, really indicative of the problem that we have. So what did you hear growing up? You heard, if I do the right things, if I go to school and I graduate from high school and I go to college or a trade school and I get a job and I get stable, then I can get a house and I can build a mortgage and I can create wealth and have the American dream, right? That's the promise.
Yeah.
And we've broken that promise right now.
Mm-hmm.
Our financial structure, our housing costs, we have 100% broken that deal with an entire generation. And to me, that's the existential crisis that we're dealing with in housing.
Yeah.
That is the problem.
Okay.
And so when I talk to city councils, in fact, I did this with the bankers. I say the same thing to city councils. I tell them, this is no longer a policy issue. This is no longer a political issue. This is a moral issue. This is what we have promised. Our values, particularly in Utah, we have, Utah values. We stand on them.
To start a family, and you need a home.
You need a place to live. And when you're living in someone's basement, you don't really want to bring your new bride or husband to your parents' basement. And then you certainly don't want to raise kids there. And I think, there's some challenges with even creating kids when you're living in your parents' basement. Those things are all like off the table, kind of. And so we've broken that promise. And it's happened quickly. I mean, this has just popped out of a very unique set of circumstances. And we just have to acknowledge that and restore that opportunity and promise. And that is not anything less than a moral imperative to my generation and to the generation above mine to say we have to fix this, or we are not doing what we say. We're not holding up our own values. And it's that, to me, it's that like evangelical, I hope you get that sense. I mean, this is a real significant generational, institutional, national concern that if we don't fix this, our system will crash at some point.
Yeah.
I just look at it like those bottom rungs of the socioeconomic ladder that existed for my great-grandparents and my grandparents and parents and myself. We're just removing those bottom rungs. They're gone right now. You need $120,000 just to afford a home in Utah. Those don't exist. So it's a critical issue. And I heard the governor talk about it. He said it's housing and homelessness 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So
and we don't even have to wonder what's going to happen. This is the really unique thing. I think we actually know what happens when we keep people from having housing. And if you think about the redlining efforts, we talked about this earlier, the zoning and redlining that happened through the 1980s, we denied access to home ownership to an entire, to 3 generations of Black Americans. And so now we have Black Lives Matter. What is that born out of? That's born out of a sense that they don't have a dog in this fight. They've been excluded from the prosperity of the nation. And so they're going, what do I have to lose? Because you've excluded me from this whole structure. And we're paying the price for not allowing them to build wealth. Our social costs are a direct reflection of our failure to allow an entire, several generations of an entire class of people to not build wealth. And we're paying for it.
Yeah.
And so, Allegra, I'm sorry, we're working on this. We're going to try and fix it for you because we need less of this, not more.
Okay. And our next question's from Audrey, who's in a different situation.
Example is the Magnolia that is downtown that was approved for affordable housing. And the folks, it's ran by the Road Home. And the folks that currently occupy the Magnolia, we can see that there is a great disparity in families such as single mothers with children, or young families with maybe 2-3 children that could really occupy and utilize affordable housing in a different manner than, say, the Road Home today. Is there projections for building more affordable housing, such as the Magnolia, for families where the government is building those and operating them, or maybe more of the how they're being ran and who oversees them? So it's not so much connected to homeless services, but just families that are middle to low income families that are struggling.
With just basic housing needs, not necessarily all the supporting services. Is that your...
Correct. And so there's a lot of housing that's been built, especially in the downtown area, but it's all apartment complex building style structures. There's no parks. There are very little schools. You can't have a child cross the busy roads. It's just not family.
I think they call that the missing middle, right?
Yeah, and I think that's when you think about external ADUs, that's an opportunity maybe to address that need, because then you could have you can put a 1,200, 1,500 square foot prefabricated home that looks nice, it functions great, on a property that already exists. You've got access, obviously, to a backyard there. You're in a neighborhood. I mean, it's a different, much better solution. But I also think when we talk about this public lands initiative, when we look at that, that's where the opportunity lies, I think, to really address that. When the governor talks about, let's get starter homes at 300 to 350,000. I mean, that's the economic reality for a market rate home right now. That is just what it is. I mean, we're not going to see that go backwards anytime soon. Construction costs are not going to drop. Our land prices, as we know, are not going to go down, because that's just what happens as we get more and more supply constraints. But with the public lands initiative, that gives us the opportunity to take that a piece of that land cost out, which allows that whole bottom rung of the ladder to drop down to handle people who are making 50% or 40% AMI. They're single parents. They're working as much as they can. They've got 3 kids. The kids are in school. They can't work 2 jobs because they got to take care of their kids. I mean, that's when that's where I talk about this moral imperative, that we have to solve this, because that is part of what we signed up for. That is part of the fabric of our country, and that's what we have committed to, to do, is to help those who, through no fault of their own generally, or even if it is their fault, we still need to provide them help. That's a Judeo-Christian basic ethic, and again, we're dealing with a unique circumstance. The government has never really had to get too deeply involved in market rate housing. This is a new thing for us. Post World War II, we had this issue when we had all the GIs coming. Millions of GIs came home. So what did we do? We made affordable financing available, and we built small houses. And they could afford them, and we're now riding the wave of all of that wealth that was generated from that housing opportunity that we created for them. And it's, you have to look at it as a 60 or 70 year benefit. But if we help those people, they will create generational wealth that will benefit them, their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. I mean, we are all the beneficiaries of what happened in 1950.
Yeah. And even before that, I spent a little time examining the tenement housing.
Yeah.
I mean, that model, which has been totally destroyed in all American cities, actually made kind of a lot of sense. You have shared bathroom and kitchens. You just have little rooms that people would live in. I mean, kind of like a motel room. But that was what really built up the major cities around the turn of the century. In Chicago and New York, you had these tenement housing facilities, and that was really low income housing.
I think there's a few of them in Salt Lake now, aren't there? A couple of them here.
I actually knew a guy who was living in one where he had a shared. It was very, very small, but he had a shared kitchen and bathroom space, and it's they're kind of looked at as either like hostels, like you see that you can rent them out, but it's just like, why don't we open up that for developers? Why don't we open up that housing type? Is there a reason why?
I don't know that it's not allowed, because I know we do have some of those in Salt Lake. I don't know enough about that model.
Bigger structures?
I think they did an apartment. I think there's an apartment building that's kind of modeled after that. I think there were maybe another couple proposed. I just don't know enough about that granular level of what that is.
The Ramada could have been.
Yeah.
The developers plan on putting kitchenettes in each one. I'm like, why even bother? Just leave it the way
Yeah.
it is and paint it and get them ready.
Someone said on the Instagram, we have a family of 5 in an apartment in West Jordan. Rent keeps going up by $150 to $200 per year, but houses are completely out of reach. I don't know the right question to ask, but I'm feeling trapped.
Yeah, I mean that's she's not alone. I mean that is a very common experience that even if you get a raise, it's just immediately eaten up by inflation, including your house prices. So you're not actually making any more money. You're just treading water because and in most cases, rent prices have raised higher than faster than wage increases have gone up. The macro answer to that question is more supply. We have a housing shortage. We have to build more. We have to make more available. We have to do intelligent and well planned out density so that we can provide reasonably cost housing at a range of incomes. I mean, that is the macro answer to that question. As far as what opportunities exist for her in that community, if you're listening, call me. I'll hook you up with people in your community that do that work. I can only guarantee you that it won't be quick, easy, or painless. But there are resources out there that are designed to help, and there are very good people in our communities that are doing work in this space and really dedicated to helping people navigate some of the Byzantine bureaucracy you get when you get in these social welfare programs.
Yeah, it's tough out there. I think that inflation is eating into so many people's lifestyle right now, and
Yeah.
no easy solution. But I think that's about it. That's all of our questions. Later, is that right?
There's one more. So someone said, if housing is so unaffordable, then who is buying the houses? Because houses for sale are being swiped up very quickly.
That's a great question. So what we're seeing is, and a lot of the blame goes on people moving to Utah from out of state. There's some truth to that. And in fact, during the pandemic, our typical ratio is we have about 70% of our growth is in-house growth, our own kids, our own grandkids, and about 30% comes from elsewhere and they move into the state. During the pandemic, for the first time probably since like 1857 or something, I don't know when, we had more in-migration than we had natural growth in Utah for 2 years.
Wow.
First time in a long time. And so we are seeing out-of-state money coming in and purchasing. I think it's a combination of that. It's a combination of corporate acquisition. We didn't even get into overnight rentals, but that's another issue that we've got where people are taking primary housing stock and converting it into overnight rentals, where you're really taking it completely out of the residential real estate structure, which is a problem. That is just a real problem. In some communities, it's much worse than others. And that's one of the reasons why with the legislation that we passed last year, we required a minimum of 5 years of owner-occupied deed restriction. And some communities are saying, well, we want 50 years. And we're saying, great, do it for 50 years. Make sure that, that stays as an owner-occupied home for 50 years. Because once it leaves that owner-occupied space and it becomes a rental, when you want to bring that back into owner-occupancy, you're not buying a home. You're buying an income stream. You're buying someone's income stream out of that piece of property. And that's
it's
not
like-
the same thing as buying a house.
That's a difficult one to legislate too, because I know some people who are Airbnb part of their home because it helps them make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
So they're still occupying the home, but they're doing the short-term rental thing, which is very helpful to them. So it's like,
And to me, that's okay.
yeah, that's great. I mean, that's fine. But it's like, if you just tried to exclude Airbnbs from
Completely,
a neighborhood
yeah.
completely, you're really messing up people's ability to survive.
Most of the thoughtful policy around that does have an owner occupancy requirement to it, and that's the most thoughtful policy, because if you're occupying that home for even 11 and a half months of the year, and you rent it out for 2 weeks and you're gone and somebody comes in and moves in for 2, that's not hurting the housing market. But it's when that house is sitting vacant for 6 months out of the year and 6 months out of the year it's being rented nightly, you've taken that out of the housing market. You've now, reduced -1 to the shortage we already have. And so there's some things we need to look at from a legislative standpoint. We give a benefit for residential property tax exemption to people who live in their homes, but that also applies to rentals. A lot of Airbnbs are taking advantage of that exemption. We need to make sure that we're not granting that exemption, because that's a public benefit that we're giving them that public benefit. We're not getting the back end of that, which is somebody living in our communities and building our communities. We've given away the benefit and we just lost money. Same thing with corporate ownership. Do we need to take a look at the real estate tax structure around property tax structure around corporate ownership?
It seems like that would be the solution to both the home and land banking. You see in Park City, we have a story about that, how it's like half the homes are occupied just a few months out of the year because the billionaires love putting their money into homes in Park City. It's, if you just increase property taxes by whatever multiple makes it painful enough to make them sell it, it just seems that could be the solution. But
Well, or you take that revenue and you use it to create affordable housing.
yeah,
I mean, that's the other, the other model. I mean, again, we live in America and we're believers in, the economy and kind of free market principles, but there are costs to doing what you're doing, and there are, nothing is free, right? I mean, there's no free ride in anything. And so if you want the benefit, it's okay if you want to pay the freight and the fare to get there. And if that freight and fare is, hey, we need to create a revenue stream for additional affordable housing, then that's a way we can approach those issues without necessarily saying, hey, we're shutting you down and kicking you out, but we're just saying we're no longer going to convey this benefit to you. As a society, we've decided that that your benefit is only going this far.
well, to me, it also seems as the wealthy and the elites are able to kind of rig the system in their favor. If a policy like that were passed, just the opposite would happen. You could have a system in place where all of those additional property taxes that corporations are paying, or the millionaires who don't live in those homes are paying, it all goes to affordable housing. You're rigging it in the opposite direction that could actually benefit people.
Yeah, and there's some really good public policy arguments around that process, because again, you're creating a cost to a certain behavior, and you're saying, hey, this is the cost that you have to pay in order to engage in this behavior. We do that all the time. You want to drive? Smoking? You want to smoke? You want to drive? You want to drink? You want to go to a restaurant? I mean, you pay the cost of that behavior. It's totally up to you whether you behave that way. But there's a cost associated with it, and we measure those costs as a function of public benefit. And we now have a crisis that is unique in our history. We haven't had this type of a run up in housing prices relative to income ever.
But do you ever see a legislation passing that's like that could actually be a detriment to the people who are assigned to pass it? Because I bet a lot of the people in the legislature are developers.
It's always a tough one.
Airbnbs, and they just, I saw an interesting meme that said the Utah State Legislature is the side hustle for Utah's developers.
Well, I was the worst of all worlds, right? When I was elected, I'm a former lawyer, I'm a former developer, I'm a white Mormon male. I'm like the worst of every category. I'm like the evilest, of all. But I think what I found in the legislature was that most of the people there, and almost without exception, they're there trying to do the right thing. Their perspective of what the right thing is always, subject to individual interpretation, individual circumstance and background. But I think in this particular instance, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, there is a broad recognition that we have an existential crisis in front of us. And so I think if we can promote and present really thoughtful policy that is well crafted and not designed necessarily just to punish, we're going to punish this, but we want to solve this problem. That's where good legislation happens. Is when it's designed to actually approach and solve a problem rather than just to slap somebody that you don't like how they're behaving. And that's a lot tougher to push back on, when even you have self-interest in the other direction. And I, again, I think my former colleagues, I trust them to make those hard decisions, because their kids are living in their basements too. Yeah. And I'll tell you, go to the legislature, ask them to raise their hands. Half of them are going to go up and they say, I got a kid living with me, or my kid's graduating from college. They have nowhere to go. They're coming home next year.
I suppose if they see that every single day, that gives them a hint
what
might need to happen.
It's creating a whole new wave of need in a socioeconomic category that really hasn't had to confront this. And that shows how dire the situation really is.
Yeah. Well, that feels like a good place to wrap up. Thanks so much, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much. I'm happy to come back anytime and waste your airtime and your,
No, it's been great.
Talk to your listeners.
A lot of tough questions, and you stood up to have the courage to come in. Well, thanks everybody for watching. If you want to support this program, go subscribe to Utah Stories magazine. It will make your life better because you'll know where to buy local produce at all the farmers markets. You'll know where to go to see the coolest stuff in Utah, and you'll find out about the biggest hot button issues to solve Utah's problems. And our storytelling competition was a huge hit. Come out. We haven't figured out the date yet, but we had really amazing storytellers. The caliber of stories is getting much better. So if you want to win the $100, the gift cards, come out to the event. Check out utahstories.com. Subscribe to our free digital newsletter. If you don't want to subscribe to the magazine, it's totally free, and we'll let you know where our next one is. So thanks for watching. Thanks again, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.